And here he comes, left to right, your first time ever at the Wings of Eagles Air Show. The grand champion aircraft at the huge show at Oshkosh recently, Apollo 8 astronaut Frank Borman and the P-63 Kingcobra.
I'm Frank Borman. I'm fortunate enough to own this P-63. The airplane has a very interesting background. It was purchased right after the war by a gentleman who intended to race it. It was flown into Van Nuys, and in landing in Van Nuys, he blew out all 3 tires, and the airplane sat derelict for 50 years. We purchased it in 1996 and had it restored by Square One Aviation in Chino. It took about 16 months to do it. It's as authentic as we can make it. There were 3,300 P-63s built at Bell. 2,600 of them went to Russia. The remaining stayed at the U.S., but none of them were ever used in combat by the U.S. side. There are 4 of them still flying, 3 in this country and 1 in England.
There's the P-63, look at that.
This airplane has a way to start it with an external starter. They mounted an electric motor on the back of a 6x truck, and then you had a cog in there, you could start it. Inside of that big pipe is a 37mm cannon that has 38 rounds in it, and that's what gave it its punch against tanks. It's liquid-cooled Allison V12 1710-117, about 1,350 horsepower. Radiator, oil and coolant radiators located in the ring root, and the temperature is controlled by the flaps you see down there in the back. Lets the air in and out, helps it control. It heats up on the ground a lot more than a 51 does. These drop tanks are the standard World War II 75-gallon tanks, and believe it or not, this plywood bracing is exactly the way it was done. People always ask me, what about that? Well, that's the way it was. This airplane is the only one in the world that has a functional supercharger. General Motors didn't want to disrupt the production of the Allison to build an internal supercharger, although that was the obvious shortcoming of that engine. So they clamped on a supercharger on the back of the engine. It was the forerunner of the hydromatic transmission. This is the only one in the world that has that working. As a pilot, you get to monitor 3 oil pressures: the nose case, the engine, and the supercharger. Right here are the exhaust stacks. There are 2 for each cylinder, 12 on each side. As you can see, the pilot sits very close to the front of the engine, and it's a noisy airplane. Even though you would wonder about that because the exhaust is behind you, it's still pretty noisy.
Once again, to get a look at that unusual configuration, you can see the engine headers back behind the cockpit of the airplane as we get a little bomb action going here.
The main reason for putting the engine behind the pilot was so that they could put a cannon firing through the nose hub. The throttle quadrant is located on the left. It's conventional. All of the instrumentation here, the flight instruments are modern instruments, although we have an overlay to hide the modern radios, so that the rest of the cockpit appears exactly as it was in 1944. It's a conventional stick, an all-electric gear. It's really quite typical of the World War II airplanes. This airplane has a tricycle landing gear. I think the only other World War II fighter that had that was the P-38. It makes landing and takeoffs a much more easy task for the pilot. You can see we've mounted an inert 250-pound bomb under the airplane. They carried up to 500-pound bombs, but 250 was their standard bomb load. I was with NASA for 8 years, and I flew twice, once on Gemini 7 and once on Apollo 8. The Apollo program was really a battle in the Cold War, and we dedicated a lot of lives and a lot of effort to that, and 400,000 Americans made it happen. We beat the Russians to the moon. It was a great triumph for the people that participated in it. The astronauts got most of the publicity, but believe me, we wouldn't have got to first base without all the people that really did their job.